2, 3.
Something I've always been curious about is the effects of leaving film in a hot car. This is something that I've kind of always struggled with and never really took the time to analyze the effects of this. Living in Florida, I've left countless rolls in a hot car or a hot room or whatever it is. It gets hot, so I have plenty of opportunities to leave my film in not ideal conditions. And luckily I'm a little better about this now, but recently I did this and I wasn't really paying too much attention to what the effects were. I thought maybe there was some color shifting, but it's really hard to tell, so I figure why not
conduct an experiment and share this information, because I've had kind of a hard time finding the type of information that I would like to see about this specific subject. So I left one roll in my car for about 2 weeks, and it is currently June, and temperatures inside of vehicles reach up to 140 degrees easily. I left this particular roll in the front window, kind of trying to get the worst possible situation for this film. I'm gonna try to shoot some portraits of my friend Eric in front of this seamless backdrop, and we're gonna do 3 stops overexposed, regular exposure, and then 2 stops underexposed. Someone just drove by. We're going to be using the Olympus OM1N and the Olympus OM2, mainly just because they're very similar, and I have a 50mm 1.8 on both of them. So we're just going to start with 3 overexposed, 1 normal, and then 1 underexposed. And then we'll try something else. I also think it might be important to note that I'm using the built-in OM2 spot meter. I trust it. It's done very well for me, so that's how we're getting our exposure readings. Shooting this without 3 tripods was almost impossible, and I don't know what kind of sick person has 3 tripods anyways, so I'm going to just try to set one up on the tripod, and then I'm going to come in with the other one and get as close as I can. So we're going to start with the normal exposure of the truck. I kind of wanted to do something that had a lot of color and a lot of color variation, so I went with the truck, and then to the right we have these orange garage doors, and we have a lot of green here. So at 1,000th of a second, f4, I'm getting my proper exposure. I'm going to start there. So now I'm going to do 500th, 250th, 125th. All right, for underexposure, I'm gonna do 1,000th of a second. And I know I said it was F4 was the proper exposure, but I'm gonna skip a stop just because it's too close. And I'm gonna go to F8 at 1,000th. So let's try that. Compositionally, this photo has very little value, but I do really want to see the contrast between light and dark and how it handles those two. So I think this is a very necessary photo, especially just because I'm trying to shoot all of the photos in the same day and not really leave the film in the cameras for very long. I want to get it to the lab as soon as possible so they can get the scans back and no other outside factors. I really wanted to stay away from shooting wide open, but to overexpose this, it's going to be the only way I'm going to be able to right now, just because we're losing light, but it'll be all right. So this is at 1,000th of a second, 1.8 is going to be the correct exposure. 500th is one stop. 250th. 125th. And underexposure, we're gonna do 1,000th of a second. We're gonna do 5.6. So before we review these photos, I just wanted to point out that the way that I conducted this experiment wasn't the most scientific way possible to do this. That was never my intention though. What I really wanted to see was if I were to leave my film in a hot car and I wanted to go through with getting it developed, what's really gonna happen? If I just send it off to the lab, maybe I didn't even know that it was left in a hot car, and I just sent it off to the lab, they color corrected it or corrected it for exposure. What's it gonna look like? Is it still gonna be usable? Or is this something that I need to avoid at all costs, or something that I need to throw my film away over? But I think with that being said, we can go ahead and review these photos. So I just want to say that I used all of the same settings on the OM1 and on the OM2 for the normal and hot car photos. So for this first photo of Blaine with the 16mm camera, the first thing that I noticed was the green color cast, and then it was pretty obvious that the shadow details were close to non-existent, and you can really tell it's very obvious that this is not correct. For this photo of Blaine with the flash, I didn't really see much of a big difference other than the obvious color cast, but that could be corrected really easily. Just as a general rule of thumb though, I would rather be closer right off the bat than have to go back and edit out a color cast. So this test really surprised me. I originally thought that the normal roll was the hot car roll because of the shadow detail. There is a lot more shadow detail in the hot car roll compared to the normal roll. And there's also a pretty apparent blue color cast in the shadows as well. I think this is mainly a scanning thing. The Noritsu tried to correct some gnarly color cast that isn't apparent here, but I thought that was a really interesting difference between these two comparisons. And then I also noticed that here the shutter curtain is going slower for the slower shutter speeds, which you'll also see in some of the other photos. But other than that, I think that the normal to overexposed side of things held up really well, and I was pretty surprised. For this series of photos in the test, I was also kind of surprised. Just starting with the underexposed, there's some pretty obvious mud in the shadows here, and this is not savable. This is something you wouldn't be able to save, but here you might be able to do something to save that. It's probably just a result of heat damage. For the normal exposure, they're really close. There's not much difference. I think the only other thing really worth talking about is the two overexposed images. On the normal roll, we have this classic kind of overexposed look that you would expect to get, and some color shift to a warm, which makes sense to me. But on the hot car roll, it's kind of darker, which I thought was really unusual. So I can't really explain that. Could just be more heat damage on that part of the film, or for a lot of these photos, I don't think there's any true science to it. I think it could have been hotter on one side of the film. That could cause certain areas of the roll to be more affected by heat damage than others. So it's really hard to do a super in-depth analysis of exactly what's going to happen to your film. For this photo, really the only thing I can say is that there is a very different color cast. The blue on the hot car, and the more true to color on the normal roll. There might be some shadow detail loss, but I
think that the scanner probably did a pretty good job of correcting that. Other than that, there's really not much going on here, and I don't even think this is the end of the world. I think it's something you could correct. It could also be something that you like. Same thing with this photo. It's the same exact situation, similar lighting, obvious color cast here, but I think honestly it's not that big of a deal. It's not that bad, and you could fix it. This photo is the most obvious reason for me to not leave my film in a hot place. The shadows are completely muddy, no saving this situation. Over here, I don't know what this is, just some random heat damage. But yeah, this is the most obviously bad photo out of the group. I realized that my shutter curtain was going slower on the OM1. The OM2 is fine. It's very unfortunate because it took a long time to do this test, and when I got these negatives back, I was pretty unhappy, but I think it's fine, and there's still a lot of information here that we can gather. One thing being, whatever this weird heat damage is here, that looks like it probably matched up with the sprockets, and I don't know why, but I highly doubt it's a scanning issue. It's an Noritsu, and I've never had anything like that from the lab before, so I highly doubt that it would happen on this roll. So I can't explain that, but there's also a similar situation here, but they don't match up with sprockets or anything. So it's pretty unusual. Yeah, but other than those weird heat damage spots, I'm not seeing a massive difference between the normal to overexposed range here. Maybe some different color shifting, but probably pretty slightly. Nothing that would be like a deal breaker for me.
I think it's safe to say if you leave your film in a hot car or in a very hot, unideal place to leave your film, it's not going to be the end of the world. You're still going to have images. They might not be perfect, they might not be tack sharp, you might lose shadow detail, but it's still worth getting developed, and it's still worth seeing how they come out, and maybe you get some cool light leaks or some weird color shift that you didn't know you wanted. I don't think it's something that is the end of the world. So hopefully you learn something about maybe taking care of your film, because I know I'm definitely going to try my best to take care of film in the future and keep it in a good place, because this isn't exactly what I'm going for. Maybe it is something you're going for, and that's fine. But for me, I want my Portra 400 to look like Portra 400.